In 2023, the world's most anticipated anime finally reached its climax, and up until this point, controversy and toxicity was rampant due to the divisive ending of the manga. Now, I did a video here revisiting that ending before this final episode aired. However, many were anticipating the anime ending's failure due to a couple key factors. 1. Some people thought Eren's character was sabotaged, claiming that Eren never achieved his goal set out from episode 1, which was to stop the Titan conflict. They also believed that Eren was a wimp and a soy boy for actually being in love with Mikasa and being punched by Armin at the end of the series, claiming that this doesn't make sense as Eren was never shown to love Mikasa and that Armin was a traitor and he should have been killed. A lot of this is oversimplification on my part. You can search up Reddit posts from this time to get the full picture, I'm sure. Not that I would recommend that because, oh boy, it'll make you immediately want 25 milligrams of Zoloft real quick. And 2, Armin in the original manga pretty much thanked Eren for committing mass genocide. This was actually later revealed by the creator of the series, Hajime Isayama, that he felt the dialogue in that final moment wasn't what he had hoped to achieve, and that he accidentally worded some of the dialogue poorly, adding to the scene's admitted clunkiness in the manga. However, with news hitting just weeks before the final episode's much anticipated release, it was announced that Hajime Isayama had written an entirely new script for the ending, and he, just like every other episode of Attack on Titan, was heavily involved in the production along with MAPPA and their support studios. To simply put, the man was on board, but there was this pesky little thing keeping much of the Attack on Titan fanbase extremely divided. And when it came to this war, you were either on their side or you were a soy boy cuck. Of course, I am talking about the AOE, aka Anime Original Ending. AOE, in theory, is as simple as it sounds. It was a proposed theory that Hajime Isayama had, according to those that had created it, actually planned out a true ending in which Eren goes through with annihilating everyone outside of Paradis and flattening the world. In other words, true 100% rumbling as opposed to the 80% rumbling in the manga. Like, that wasn't enough? And that the anime was a different timeline from the manga, and through hidden context clues throughout the anime, like eyes being different colors, Historia's pregnancy giving contextual clues, this ending would somehow restore Eren's status as a Chad and a king, and Isayama, well, was 100% on board, and that this AOE theory would 100% happen. So much so, I was pummeled for years in my comments with toxicity and personal attacks. People were furious, to simply put. However, at the time, I had argued staunchly that there was no precedent for an anime original ending, not just in Attack on Titan, but usually with anime in general. And I had a very sound and economical answer that I believed was grounded in a more realistic approach based historically on how the anime industry operates. Simply put, MAPPA, a studio that had at the time went through drastic change going from a pretty solid and decent studio to one filled with absolute turmoil and chaos. Under insane conditions, the Jujutsu Kaisen Zero film was produced in under 3 months. Chainsaw Man was cut from a 24-episode first season to just 12 and was barely completed in about a year, and Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 was facing horrible crunch with some episodes featuring dozens of animation directors trying to finish episodes all the way up until the very last moment. On top of that, anime has a history of never changing endings for series that up until the ending was completely faithful. While comparisons were made to Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, this just simply wasn't a good example, as the original Full Metal was one-to-one faithful up until halfway through the story, and then went completely anime original because the manga was still being serialized. The story wasn't complete. And with Brotherhood, it was in many ways more faithful to the manga, but this was a totally different series produced years after the original anime aired. They didn't just change the ending, they left out half the story with Brotherhood and expected viewers to have watched the original Full Metal anime or have read the manga. And as well, the myriad of anime ruined by Butcher adaptations like The Promised Neverland and Tokyo Ghoul were brought up, but these felt like just classic internet gymnastics if anything else, because once again, these series were not as nearly faithful in any way to the original manga from the beginning. And finally, Isayama was involved. While the big theory was that Isayama was in on the AoE theory with the English-speaking AOT community, this, because of the reasons listed above, simply just would not have made sense for only the ending to change. So, my theory on the ending was simple. Nothing will change. Isayama will simply add a couple things to flesh out sequences, motifs, or themes, and will change dialogue only to be worded more clearly like how he originally intended. So basically, my theory was grounded more or less, and I felt that this certain fanbase's position was, in some cases, way more extreme. And I got a lot of hate because of this, but since I turned out to be 100% completely right, and I can now say that after the fact, now that I look back and really just laugh, I was never able to say, and I intentionally did this, I never said I was right. So, to all those comments I got, guys, you were really mean, and you should apologize.
I take responsibility for racism.
Especially since all I was doing was trying to make good content, but no, can't just be a normal dude out here, everything always has to be some sort of attack. So yeah, let's jump into it. This is Attack on Titan's ending, 1 year later, and why it is still a masterpiece.
Hey, espera um pouco!
So, when it comes to the ending, a lot of what people dislike about it really has nothing to do with the actual final episode in many regards. Like, it's mostly just the last thing that happens in the episode, which I kind of find that really funny, because what I remember from basically since the beginning of the final arc of Attack on Titan, a lot of people complained about things like Hanji's death being unsatisfying, which sounds weird now because, well, yeah, those complaints largely came from the manga readers. But even then, a lot of the hate around moments like these, it just felt bad faith to me, disingenuous, or simply felt arbitrary, as people just decided to label them as bad because many people just didn't understand what Attack on Titan was trying to be for the perspective of characters, themes, and story. It happens. That's why I bring up Hanji's death, because it's one of those deaths that now nobody ever would bat an eye towards. It's seen as one of the best deaths in Attack on Titan. But back then, when this manga was still serializing, yeah, people really did not like this death, which even at the time, I honestly just found, like, ridiculous, because it's the same in the anime as it is in the manga. So, it's weird, right? There's, like, that weird inconsistency in the community on this thing that, when the manga was serializing, everyone apparently hated, but suddenly when the anime came out, it just, the complaints stopped? Very weird. So, keep this in mind, because the big complaints about the ending came back to this thing. I don't know what you'd call it, but that thing that I just described. Forum talking points from the most hardcore of hardcore fans that are so into the weeds of trying to predict what they thought would be the ending, but got so into theorizing that the fandom in the most hardcore of circles got really out of control and toxic in their echo chambers. Seriously, when we study the downfall of the 20s and the 30s and the breakdown of communication which happened within it, you could probably legitimately study the AOT fandom as a microcosm or a good example of generally how the internet became a useless tool for many. And just in general, Kitty, please don't. So this brings us to the ending proper, and what I remember, and now looking back through research and video comments on old videos, yeesh, some of those are rough, many people seem to be angry because of Eren's character. The criticism revolves around the idea that Eren Yeager was one in which set him up as the tragic anti-hero. So because of this, many expected Eren to stay to his convictions no matter what it cost. I mean, we can go back to one of the most beloved scenes by pretty much everyone, which is a side note I also find funny that the fandom just universally agreed upon this one. This is somehow one of them, even though this is where a lot of misunderstandings begin to bubble up. Funny. Of course, this moment is when Eren and Zeke go through the paths to relive the many memories and piece together the narrative that Zeke is trying to tell Eren to understand how all of this started and how he should listen to his plan of euthanasia. When they go to relive the cabin scene from many years later, the iconic scene where Eren wraps the scarf around Mikasa, we see that Eren believes in something very simple. Those who wish to take away his freedom shall face the wrath of Eren Yeager and have their freedom taken away, either through punishment or through death. Now, what Eren is saying here is that he is someone who fights for his freedom because it is an instinctual need for him, like how we need to breathe, eat, or fight. It's about the same for Eren. Freedom is no different from a basic human need. So this is why we saw Eren activate the rumbling and become the McRumbling and flatten 80% of the world. Eren was literally a slave to the ideal of freedom. He was trapped in a circle that he felt he could break, but ultimately fell into the cycle of freedom and revenge over and over again, just like everyone else. So when Eren didn't achieve 100% rumbling, turning the planet into a marble, many people felt this went against Eren's need for freedom. After all, if you are truly free, then even freedom itself can't keep you shackled. But what Eren figured out is that the genocide via the rumbling was ultimately a result of him being forced by the very powers that allow him to rebel and achieve freedom, the Titan powers. Needless to say, but you could see the issue with that right away. This is contradictory. How can you be free but a slave to freedom? How can you be a symbol of freedom when you have no agency? That undermines the entire point of the character. It's a contradiction. He didn't want to do it, but he had no choice. Marley didn't give him a choice. They took them all away from him, and so this is the crux of the argument that Attack on Titan's ending is bad. Eren should have not contradicted himself and achieved 100% rumbling and become the Chad King of the incels that never fucked bitches, never showered, and only played free-to-play games from morning to night. Eat, sleep, McRumblin', repeat. But I have a different point of view, because while having this thought I think is generally fine, it just doesn't go far enough, in my opinion. It doesn't at all take into context Eren's character from Chapter 1. Or Episode 1. It doesn't take into account his relationship with his family, Armin and Mikasa, and it ignores the themes that Hajime Isayama put into the series. In other words, I think it's a narrow point of view. Much of the fandom was missing the forest for the trees. And I get it, I'm not perfect either, I've missed stuff in the past, but let's be honest here, the point of Attack on Titan from the very beginning was not to destroy everything. Which is funny, because even Hajime Isayama realized this himself. He originally wanted a full espresso depresso ending where everyone dies, but he quickly realized very early on in the manga that this wouldn't be a satisfying ending at all. Would it be realistic? Maybe. Who knows? But I agree with Isayama to change the ending to what it is now. The reason is very simple. It didn't contradict anything because contradiction is in of itself a human design. This played into it, if anything. No, Kitty, you cannot have my food. So, another criticism of the ending, and one I think is fair, mind you, generally speaking, is that Ymir Fritz's backstory felt inconsistent. Ymir, she was the founding Titan, and was used by King Fritz to essentially create the Titan curse. He enslaved her, abused her, and exploited every part of her to the point that he made his children feast upon her body after death. But some felt that the reveal of Ymir Fritz loving King Fritz just didn't make sense, because why would such a person agree to simply be enslaved because she loved Fritz? The entire reason she is in these paths is only because she is in love with her abuser, and many feel as if the Stockholm Syndrome she experiences, while fine on paper, in execution feels uneven and falls flat, leaving many feeling confused. To some, it was just poorly developed and contradictory. This idea that Ymir would be freed by Mikasa killing Eren just because of her inability to let go of love felt a little unearned. And it felt unearned because, rightfully so, the Ymir Fritz storyline just did not get enough focus to make people feel satisfied. It reduced Ymir's character to a shallow, romanticized notion of Stockholm Syndrome. And if you were to ask me my personal opinions on this, I actually do somewhat agree with the notion that we should have gotten much more story for Ymir Fritz. I felt like we didn't see clearly enough from Ymir's perspective why she fell in love and chose to support King Fritz, despite everything that happened to her. But I also think this minor criticism of the story is often taken and blown out of proportion, either in bad faith or misunderstanding. Let's be clear, there is nothing wrong with Ymir Fritz having Stockholm Syndrome or being in love with King Fritz. Why? Because the story for Ymir wrapped up rather nicely and went full circle, which is what Attack on Titan is great usually at doing. This played into Mikasa and Eren's relationship and how Mikasa did what Ymir wasn't able to do, which is break the cycle. It's one of the most integral aspects of Attack on Titan's entire story, which is also rather funny because people will often say that Mikasa is the most poorly developed and boring character, which is just wow, I mean, that's just not true, right? Mikasa is a very robust character that develops and changes quite a bit, unlike her romantic counterpart, Eren, who doesn't change at all from episode 1 to the final gasp of breath of his character in the final episode. Point being is this, I think people through the internet, telephone, and algorithms have just taken this admittedly weak aspect and made it seem like they dropped a nuke on the entire thing. No, just because it seemed uneven or just not as good as it could have been doesn't mean that it's bad. There is a thing that we call nuance here. It's great. I hear it's quite underrated these days. Now, one that perplexes me is that often people will cite the rumbling having zero lasting consequences in this story. Eren's plan was to destroy a majority outside of Paradis, quite literally ending the world. Paradis is seen to be a futuristic society before it is destroyed again, with Eren achieving centuries of peace, lasting long after Mikasa and his friends have died. And the world outside of Paradis is not seen much, but we do know that the military of Paradis has also decided to essentially become the superpower of the world and continue to build alliances or even create new enemies. And the issue that a lot of the trauma the survivors experience just was simply glossed over to get to the rebuilding process. That's what they said. Don't look at me, I'm just the messenger here. Simply put, if 80% of the world being flattened isn't a consequence, I don't know what to say, honestly. I mean, come on. 80% of the world was flattened. Like, did we watch the same thing here? I mean, does that not look consequential? And remember, this is a vast majority of land. 80% of it, 80% of it. And to add on top of that, the rumbling not only was successful in Eren's goal he had for it, it had the unintentional side effect of ensuring centuries of peace. Because remember those end credits? Paradis became a futuristic society by the time it fell. That's not inconsequential. That seems pretty consequential. So, was there a lack of consequences? Probably. I would say so. Okay, I'm joking. I admit it. There were a lack of consequences, but only if you smoke lots of crack. And as we know, crack is one powerful drug. So, here is another issue people had with the ending. It was said that Armin's role as this diplomatic savior it was off. In the final episode, Armin was portrayed as a figure who would broker peace between Paradis and what was left of the rest of the world. Which is fine and all, but leading up to that, Armin's discussion with Eren in the Paths was poorly worded in the original manga. Isayama would later make a statement on this, stating that he felt his choice of words were poor. He then later went on to change that in the anime, but still some complaints were levied against Armin's character. Some felt that Armin basically forgave Eren for genocide. If you're scratching your head, you should be. That was the exact same complaint from the original ending in the manga. However, the way the anime version plays out is entirely different, so why is this still a repeated thing? What is the issue here? Well, in the original, this is what Armin says, basically. He says he thanks Eren for committing genocide. Not Isayama's finest moment, but I think that it simply just does not work. I thought that the way Isayama rewrote it, however, in the anime was perfect. It felt like exactly what he was going for in the original, but didn't have enough time to properly word or think it through. Basically, what Armin does is take equal responsibility for the rumbling and what happened just as much as Eren did, because they're brothers in arms. Armin just as much allowed Eren to do what he did than anyone else, because throughout the final season, we see many times, time and again, Armin feels he is inadequate because he's too much of a wimp to actually fight his brother. So when they do interact for the final time, Armin can't help but feel just as guilty, not only because he may in fact be guilty, but because he loves Eren and doesn't want him to suffer alone in hell. This ending felt much more in line with their characters and actually is a bit of a silver lining, if you can believe it. Armin and Eren taking dual responsibility puts into context many things. It redeems pretty much every character, really every character for what they did or didn't do in this series. Why? Because Eren is the person who put all of this into play by using the attack and founding Titan together. So everyone along the way, from Erwin to, I'd even argue to a degree, Flock, has some sort of redeeming moment for them because of this, even if you don't realize it before. Because Flock was a tool, and so was Erwin for what Eren had planned to do, right? It doesn't erase what these characters did, but it does help put into a clear view that the people we thought were responsible were simply just in a rat race that Eren himself manufactured or at least helped maintain. So, no, I have no problems with this in the anime. It's actually a really good piece of writing. But I think the biggest issue people had with the entire ending is just that in the final episode, Eren admitted to Armin that he didn't want Mikasa to move on from him, and he wanted her to always be in love and thinking about him. He even had an outburst of tears, and he did a thing called a cry about how he wanted her to love him forever and stuff. The criticism here is that it fell off and out of character for Eren, who up until this point was portrayed as a dark and edgy character who didn't love Mikasa or have any interest in romance. Instead, it strayed from the original vision of Eren being a person who had a bloodlust and wanted revenge by destroying everything in existence. For many, this felt like Isayama trying to humanize him at the very last minute, which clashed with the Eren that the entire series had built up prior fairly well. And, as expected, my argument against this is that Eren's character never changed. He wanted freedom and peace for his friends and family, that is all. He did not care about bloodlust or vengeance beyond eliminating the Titans, which is what he did. I thought it was a little strange that this amount of people misunderstood Eren's character this much. He never was this brooding warhawk incel that hated Mikasa and all women and wanted the whole world to feel his pain or misery. No, he was never that. If anything, Eren wanted nobody to experience his pain and misery, and it makes total sense that Eren loves Mikasa. There was nothing contradictory about Eren's emotional outburst at the very end. Nothing. This felt like a lot of internet trolling from people who are a little more extreme in their views, flocking over to AOT because they wanted to live out a power fantasy of destroying the world. And I know this because my comments for years have been filled with people literally saying they wanted Eren to destroy the world because they couldn't experience doing that in real life, so they wanted to live vicariously through Eren in Attack on Titan. But my rebuttal is simple. Do we not have enough isekai garbage for you to do that? Like, why does everything need to be a self-insert character? Eren's decisions made total sense within the plot, and there was nothing blatantly contradictory about it beyond what we've discussed prior. I think this is the most misunderstood part of Eren's character, and it shows that it fooled many people because we even have stuff like anime original endings made by fans who sought to implement the 100% rumbling ending where Eren is the father of Historia's baby and everyone is killed, and Eren sits on his throne as the Chad King, and I ask, how many isekai air every anime season? Do we need that garbage ruining the ending to Attack on Titan? I don't know. While I am sure this won't be the final time I talk about the ending for Attack on Titan in some capacity, audible groan, I'm sure people will choose to believe what they want to anyways. I still think that Attack on Titan's ending is a masterpiece. There is just something so dark, so satisfying, and so uniquely human about Attack on Titan. It perfectly describes the cycle of humanity to a T. That final credits scene is a distillation of Attack on Titan's entire plot in about 5 minutes' time. And that is war and conflict will never stop. Not for anyone or anything. Humans grow through conflict, and through conflict we strive for peace. So then, why do we achieve peace through conflict? Something that is not peace. Isn't that a contradiction? Well, my friend, you just figured it out. Humanity is a contradiction. Everything we do is in the service of compromise and contradiction, because it is everything we do. To find your true love, you have to be together, which is a compromise. To be good at your job, you have to put in work to get good. And of course, to exist at all is a death sentence. To live is to die. Such a beautiful, sweet, and enticing contradiction that just makes you want to think forever about it and all of life's intricacies. And isn't that what Attack on Titan is really about? Contradiction? And how it makes things interesting? If you made it to the end of the video, please consider throwing me a bone over at Patreon or using my GamerSubs partner code to get 10% off all orders. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.